Dean, with extensive knowledge and experience in tax and legal and software and services, Dean directs the legal markets group of Wolters Kluwer, Legal and Regulatory US. Under his leadership, the team provides technology and information solutions to law firms, corporate legal departments, law schools, government, and other organizations. In this role, he's responsible for accelerating the vision and strategy for the legal markets and innovation teams, with a particular focus on rapid development of advanced digital products and services to enhance customers' efficiencies and workflow. That's very impressive. Dean has more than 25 years of experience in the tax and legal software and services industry. He received his MBA from George Washington University and holds both a BS and MS in electrical engineering from Columbia. And I'd also like to welcome David Lat. David Lat is editor-at-large and founding editor of Above the Law, as well as the author of Supreme Ambitions, a novel. He previously worked as a federal prosecutor in Newark, New Jersey, a litigation associate at Wachtell, Lipton, Rosen & Katz, and a law clerk to Judge Dermot Scanlon of the U.S. Court of Appeals for the Ninth Circuit. Welcome, both of you, and we're going to be talking about what the tech-savvy law librarian needs to know. How can law libraries drive the future of law practice?
We sat on the correct side.
There you go.
Really by chance.
Just take it from there. Thanks.
Thanks so much, everyone. We'll keep the presentations brief because we know that you all want to have a chance to mingle and speak with each other. So Dean and I are going to chat a little bit. It's kind of funny, it's called a fireside chat because I think the last thing we want right now is a roaring fire. And then we're going to have presentations by some innovative tech companies, kind of like, like The Voice or Shark Tank. I'm going to be Paula Abdul. Marlene can be Simon Cowell. For those of you who, I guess, wow, I'm really dating myself. So anyway, I wanted to start, Dean, and just ask you very generally. You've had a lot of experience in the legal sector. How has the role of the law librarian changed over the time that you've been working in legal?
Thanks, David. And thanks, Deb. And next time when we have the bio, the 25 plus years, we can leave that part out. It sounds a lot better when you're younger and you're like, oh, I've been there for 20 years. It's interesting, I think that, and we were just chatting about this a little bit before we sat down here. I think you've had this huge, you have a bunch of macro environmental forces in the law firm community that are kind of conspiring to change things, if you will, for a number of staff, including researchers, but also attorneys in the law firm. I think when you look at the impact of technology, it really changes the way we can apply content in practice of law, both research and within transactional litigation support. But I think that there's other things that are really impacting us. One is that you see, at least in large law, corporate clients are very picky right now. And so I think you see a lot of corporate clients are very demanding. They are not hesitating in some cases to change clients. I think when you look at the billing rates and realization, I think you see a lot of pressure on is stuff billable or not. And so one might say, how is that relevant to the library? And I think that's the key, right? Is I think that if in the library, as the library moves forward in the large firms, if you can help the leadership of the firm solve or impact those problems, if I can drive efficiency in work that's being done, if I can help drive outcome in the work's being done through research, the tools that we apply in the practice of law, I think that you make a huge difference. And I think that is a change. I think if you go back 5 or 10 years ago, it was about the content. It's about bringing the research in, bringing the content and the practitioner together in a fashion that allows them to do their job. Right now, I think it's can you get to a point where you drive the business of the firm in some fashion? And I think that's a big change. Big change for the library and for the firm itself.
So it sounds then that like the role in many ways is becoming both more entrepreneurial and also more challenging in the sense that it's not just this transactional thing, I need a bunch of cases on X, I need the latest version of this statute. It's really much more, how can you help the firm deliver value to its clients then?
Absolutely. I think where are you providing insight, to the firm, to the clients, in adding value in that sense. And I think that I was at PLL 2 years ago, and we were having a conversation about alternative service providers, and also, I won't say the name of a company that outsources library functions. And one of the things that came back was the concept of, we kept coming back to cost, to cost, to cost. And I politely said to the folks at the table, I said, if all you're focusing on is cost, you're going to lose. You're not going to be able to compete with an outsourced provider on cost, but what you can compete on is value, the value of the firm. And I think that is a huge change.
It's interesting also, I mean, even just in terms of the titles or nomenclature, a lot of firms now, their librarians are really heads of knowledge management. Right. It really does seem like this big shift.
Yeah, absolutely, and I think that the other thing that sits in there is that the skill set of the library has not changed, right? Our ability to get in, understand the organization of content, to be able to navigate content and get to the right information for a particular task, that's all a unique skill set that's not really, and if there's a function, there are some working attorneys here, so I apologize, there's a different skill set than the attorney has. So if you think about the impact of technology as it comes in, and analytics, and other types of things that guide me in terms of strategy, either case strategy, negotiation strategy, and a contract, those are things that match up really well with the skill sets of the library. Much better so than they do with the skill sets of the attorney. We were looking at Lex Machina as an example. It's a great product, but when you look at that product and the analytics that come out of that, it's a data product. It is not a typical content product. And so I was talking to Marlene earlier and said, you know, IP attorneys, because they tend to go down that very technical route, may be very good at that, but a lot of attorneys are going to struggle with that. And the ability to source and select those tools, what's good for the firm, I think it matches up very well with the library. And I think to your point, David, you do see that blending of what was been traditionally considered KM and library. You see a lot of people that carry that title, the same title, basically. Yeah.
So you mentioned analytics, and this reminds me, I wanted to say that in addition to his work at Wolters Kluwer, Dean writes a really excellent monthly column for Above the Law about technology and innovation, which you should all check out. And in that column, he's written about analytics, blockchain, artificial intelligence, machine learning. So among the technologies that you've written about, some of the ones I've named, other ones that you're familiar with or following, is there any particular technology that you think you're particularly interested in or excited about right now?
And the thing to me that's interesting is I don't think that we've hardly scratched the surface of the AI capability in the firm. And I don't think it's AI from a robot lawyer perspective. I think if you look at, and we're obviously a historical legacy publisher with years and years and years of content, one of the things that we grapple with every single day is what information sits in that content, what data sits in that content that we're not taking advantage of right now. And I think the application of AI, machine learning, natural language processing to these content sets, be they the set of contracts that sit in the document management system of the law firm, be it rules and regs that go over time, where you're looking at what has changed and what you think is going to change moving forward. I think we're just at the very beginning of harnessing that sort of stuff. And that's kind of interesting because it's been in vogue for conversation for the last 3, 4, 5 years, right? So this is nothing new, but I really think the application of that technology is really starting to take effect. And it's going to make a huge difference to the work that we all do.
So at Above the Law, we have a lot of readers who are young attorneys and law students, and they're very much thinking about jobs. Should they be afraid of robot lawyers taking their jobs?
No, I don't think that you're going to see a displacement of law professionals. I think if you look at, though, I wrote an article on this, plugging myself a little bit, but I think that if you look at what has happened in the tax world as kind of a harbinger of what might happen in the legal world, in tax we had, in the US at least, we had electronic filing as a mandate, and you had tax software that has sprung up that makes it very easy to do calculations. And when that happened, what you saw is you didn't see it, you would have thought, well, is there a change in the demand for accountants that comes out of that? And you really didn't see a change in the demand for services, but what you did see is you saw fewer professionals providing those services and with a lot of technology assisting them. So I don't think that you would see, as Richard Susskind would say, the end of lawyers coming out of technology, but I do think that you'll see two effects that occur. One is that for the retail industry, you'll see a lot more access to justice coming from technology. And that'll make a huge difference for those of us sitting in this room who want to hire attorneys and who have difficulty doing so in a lot of cases due to the cost of it. But I think that on the professional side, the business-to-business side, you will still see the same level of demand. You will see fewer providers from it. So I don't think that robot lawyers are just gonna, I don't think there's a concept of a robot lawyer that displaces attorneys, but I do think that attorneys that are working are gonna make much heavier use of technology in their practice.
So it's interesting when you were talking about access to justice. I was intrigued by the mention of an expungement app. It seems like a great example of how technology can be used to deliver legal services to people who otherwise might have a hard time obtaining them. So I was really intrigued by that. In terms of, so you talked a lot, Dean, about how in many ways lawyers are not necessarily going to be displaced, but their functions are going to change, which makes me think of, now I'm dating myself definitely, when I was an associate doing litigation, we did document review in hard copy, like physical documents, you get paper cuts, some people would have thimbles, like it was just really kind of insane. And now, of course, that's done all with technology, and predictive coding and other tools enable it to be done much more efficiently. And there probably has been some kind of job loss in terms of attorneys who used to do that type of work, but in many ways the attorneys are now freed up to do higher level work because they're not plowing through a gigantic room full of documents. So in terms of things that have fallen away, like hard copy document review, or the fax machine, or the BlackBerry, can you think of any, what do you think is, what would you identify as a practice or a technology in the legal profession that you think is not long for this world?
Interesting question. By the way, I do know some attorneys that are still using BlackBerries.
I love the tactile keyboard. I mean, for those of you who,
there's a certain pleasure to it.
Yeah.
And I'm dating myself there too, right? So as far as, but the one that intrigues the heck out of me is that the drafting and negotiation process around transactional law and contracts to me is really a fascinating area, because there's this huge corpus of documents out there. You think about how many contracts like a GE does, right? They've got all of these representative contracts there, and we can write, like I always take an indemnity clause as the example. I can write an indemnity clause in 5 pages or in half of a page. It probably means, in some cases, the same thing. And so we don't like to use the word obfuscation, but sometimes we use language to make it difficult to understand what is actually the intent of the document there. I think that I would envision a world at some point in time where I could feed a contract into a device of some sort and have that pull out the term sheet. And so if you think about that kind of a world, as soon as I do that, I can also hit a button and draft the contract in the same fashion. So I think what you'll see is a lot of focus in on standards and intent of the legal language, and a lot less work spent on the bespoke artisan kind of work of drafting itself. I think that'll change dramatically in the next 5 years, perhaps less.
So that's actually a good segue to what we'll be doing later. Some of the companies that will be doing these quick pitches are actually in many ways helping to streamline that kind of process. So I think maybe we could take some questions from the audience, but let me just ask you one final question. In terms of, where do you see the future of the law librarian role, and what advice would you give to law librarians who want to stay current with that evolving role?
Yeah, it's interesting. If you look at some of the PLL summits over the last few years, there's been a focus on innovation and how do we get an innovation culture at the law firm. Separately, we've had conversations about how do you get a seat at the table for the strategy of the firm. I think that what's essential, I look at 2 things that whenever I try to deal with anything from a solution standpoint or an offering that we provide, and I think it matches up somewhat with the question that you asked, David, is that I think you have to understand, to be effective in your role, you have to understand what's driving the leadership of the firm. So I think when if I'm going to go pitch, for instance, to buy a solution in, and I talk to the leadership of the firm and I say, gosh, this is going to save us a bunch of time, or it's going to, that's one pitch. If I come back to them and say, gosh, this is something that's going to help us not only keep our clients, but get additional business from them and get business referrals from them. And that's a problem that the leadership of the firm is concerned about. I'm going to have much better traction because that drives the revenue, the profits per partner, the things that the partners care about. So I think one of the things is making sure you're in tune with the world that the partners are living, the firm management's living, and what the drivers are around that. And so I think that's one thing that makes you successful. And then I think the other thing is just as we go into a world we start to drive efficiency in tasks and drive outcome, I think being able to get a little bit of a sense of dig into the idea of what is the user, if this is the attorney, if this is the researcher, what are they trying to do, why, and how does this provide either an efficiency boost or towards a better outcome. And if you can describe those things and you can tie them back to the firm's directives and kind of the things that the partners care about, I think you're going to be very, very successful because you're going to be able to make decisions that help the firm. And when people see that, that helps the library itself out, continue to manage a sense of esteem and an important role in the business. And so I think that, and it sounds probably commonsensical, I guess, if that's even a word, but I think it's one of those things that a lot of times we get caught up in the operational aspects of the job that we do. How do I get this information? How do I manage these particular vendors? How do I deal with this? And you sometimes get a chance to get detached away from, if I was talking to one of the managing partners of the firm, what would I say that gets their attention for, on a 30-second elevator ride? And I think that maintaining that kind of a sense will help anybody who's trying to take that role.
That makes perfect sense. And again, a lot of these themes are ones that Dean touched on in his most recent column, so definitely check it out. We have some time for some audience questions, so if anyone wants to pose anything to Dean or me, but really Dean is the expert on these things, we would welcome questions.
Yes, go ahead. I'm not shy. I don't have a question. That's more an observation. And I'm going to show my age. I have been a librarian for a long number of years, and I can recall when I was telling people I was going to go to library school, and they thought I was crazy. Don't you know books are going away? So this was many years ago. If I do the math, it was, I graduated from library school in 1986. Okay? And books are still here, right? So my point is that robot lawyers will only be robot lawyers if the lawyers let them become robot lawyers. And and I told my friends, because I'm leaving Georgia as a teacher and I'm going to University of Illinois to become a librarian, and they thought I was crazy. I said, I'm pretty sure that the library schools, just like any other graduate program, is kind of keeping up on stuff. And they know what's going on in the world, and they know what's going on with, back then we didn't even have technology. We had telephones, landlines. There was no cell phones. They hadn't even been invented. And I said, I'm pretty sure that we're going to be okay. Because what I'm going to learn in library school back in 1986 won't be what they're learning today. I know it's not, because things have changed. But I think and I think the same thing goes for lawyers, because as librarians, law librarians in particular, but any kind of librarian, you really have to keep up with what's going on. And who wants to go to law school and get paper cuts?
No, exactly.
Right?
I mean, it's interesting. I totally agree with you.
There's high-level stuff that should be going on, and it's not document production. Attorneys are a smart group of people, as are law librarians. Many law librarians are also JDs. And it behooves us to stay up with what's going on, even though we might have graduated years and years ago from our professional degrees.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with you. I think that in some ways, even if the physical space of the library might be shrinking with some of these law firm renovations, they move to different space, etc., I think the role of the librarian in many ways is actually more important than ever. So I absolutely agree with you. And personally, I actually do really like libraries. We have a series of interviews on the site with managing partners, and one, Ted Boutros from Gibson was saying he really has a soft spot for libraries. It's just such a nice place to just kind of escape and really do some serious work. And, you're being besieged by phone calls and people sticking their head in your office. It's sometimes good to just kind of hide out in the library. So firms that have the luxury of having a really nice library. It's pretty great. Dean, do you have any?
No, I think that's all right. Yeah.
Any other comments, questions?
I'm sure I'm loud enough. I'm very loud. It's a comment and a question. You commented on the efficiencies driven by the technology and how it will sort of eliminate, tacky finger, we all remember that, those kinds of things. I think part of the problem is that the law firms have not quite figured out how these efficiencies, how to work that in so that they're profitable for them. They still run on a time-based system to pretty much most of the time degree. So my question is given that, how do you, get them to understand, or how do you sort of sell that efficiency as a profitable, when in their mind, well, that means we won't have as many billable hours, so, because not everybody, a lot of clients don't demand AFAs or, don't do that. It's still a lot of times based on time, so.
Absolutely, and it's a changing kind of environment, but you're right. There was a prediction at one point in time that everything would be an AFA, and it's certainly not come to pass,
Yeah.
right? I think that it's an interesting dichotomy of view when you talk to different people in the firm. So I have a friend of mine who is I went to college with, who's a managing partner of MoFo in New York, and so he and I grab breakfast every once in a while, and I've asked him this kind of a question, and his response is that every proposal that they give to corporate counsel has a section that talks about use and leverage of technology. And on top of that, they find themselves getting marked down on rates for a number of pieces of work. And so they walk in and they say, oh, okay, well, this is interesting. Take the document review example. I'm not paying you $450 an hour for that. You can get contract lawyers in for $150 for that, and we'll pay for that, and we're going to cap it at this point in time. And so in some cases, you even see, we'll let you go hourly until we cap. So I think one of the things that's an approach to that is to get a little bit of time. You're not going to get a lot of time, but get a little bit of time to say, hey, where are we struggling with realization? Where are things getting disallowed? Where those are things that we need to, so unbillable hours are not good.
Not going to help
Yeah,
anybody.
not going to help anybody. And how is it that, so those are a place where you start with targets on there. Where are our customers asking for efficiencies on? If you go to CLOC, the Consortium Legal Operations, or Corporate Legal Operations Consortium, I'm not sure which it is. But they have these conferences where they talk about places that there should be efficiencies and best practices around those. And they have some of those materials online too. So I think that those are places that you look at. Obviously, if you're looking at $1,000 an hour work on an M&A deal, you're probably not going to try and make that more efficient because it's probably on a $1 billion M&A transaction. That's probably getting billed and not getting pushed back on. But there are portions of that that are such as document review,
diligence, yeah,
and diligence and things of that nature that are getting pushed back on. So that's where I would focus.
The other, it's interesting, so as we all know, legal changes very slowly, so it's not like, oh, suddenly everything is an AFA. But it is interesting. AFAs, I think, before the Great Recession were pretty negligible. There was very, very little of them, probably like 5% or something. And now, the numbers seem to say it's closer to 15 to 20% of the work, depending on how you define the market, which is a sizable shift in the years since the Great Recession. And, it's inevitable that we have not, contrary to what the president might say, we have not defeated the laws of economic cycles. So at some point we're going to have another recession, and I think that we could even see more change after that. And so it's interesting, I saw a survey, I can't remember the specific numbers, but they asked partners and they asked in-house lawyers, why do you move, why does work get moved? So partners, why do you lose work? In-house lawyers, why do you transfer work from one firm to another? And so the partners were all saying things like, oh, it's because of conflicts, or oh, we went over budget, or whatever. For the in-house lawyers, the number one thing was actually inefficiency, which is different from being over budget. You could be in your budget or out of your budget, but it's just a matter of, are you efficient within your budget? And so I think that in a way, the law firms are eventually going to realize, you know what, why are we losing all this business? Maybe it's because we're really not efficient. So there is a business case there. I think it's probably not as urgent as it really ought to be because law changes slowly, but it's definitely moving in that direction. Maybe one more question, Deb, before we move to the pitches? Yep, go ahead.
Thank you. This is a somewhat loaded question because I was one of those poor, unfortunate souls who graduated law school between 2008 and 2010.
Ooh.
There you go.
There you go. My question is, no one's born a data scientist. Some people struggle with data visualization tools. Are firms making the investment for their junior associates and for their law librarians to get up to speed? Because a 3-day weekend at a conference is not enough to really learn the nuts and bolts of how to use APIs and how to use AI tools and various suites.
That's a great
That's
question.
all.
Dean?
That is a loaded question. In one sense, I could probably slip you a 20 afterwards because I like that question. But so I have a particular bent on this. Just as a matter of disclosure, I'm a technology person. You heard Deb talk. I have a master's degree in electrical engineering. I wrote code up until a point in time where I had a startup that went under, and I went back to business school and went to the business side of things. I personally think that in large part, law firms are somewhat, in some cases, misguided in their approach to use of AI and data and analytics. When I see, and that's because I try and hire these people myself, and I work for a large company with a lot of money, and we build technology solutions, right? And there's a career path for somebody that comes to work for my firm, and nobody calls them a non-lawyer, right? So I think that I think it's very hard for a large law firm to attract and retain data scientists, programmers, and people that work with APIs. So I think that personally, there's a role someplace in the vendor community, and so we're all guilty if we're not providing this role, but that is to help navigate that and make it usable in a way that you don't have to have a degree. Certainly you need to understand some things, but I think what I've seen firms do is I've seen firms say, oh, well, we can do this, and so we're going to hire a data scientist, and we're going to hire an AI programmer that's going to come in, and they're going to build this stuff out for us, and gosh, it's hard to hire and keep these people. It really is. So I don't know if I answered your question, but I think that I would rather see there be more of a relationship between the vendor community and the law firms that's a closer relationship where we're actively helping with this and, quite frankly, building better tools that are more understandable as far as that goes, as opposed to having people that are in library science try and get a master's or PhD part-time in 3-day seminars on data science. Because I think that that's just not achievable. But that's my opinion. So.
Please join me in thanking Dean and
Thank you, everybody. Thank you very much.
So we're going to take about a 10-minute break, and then we're going to come back, and we're going to have the tech companies make the pitch, make the case for their products. See you in 10.
Thank you, dude. That was delightful. I appreciate that. Well fun. I share space in